Okay, so now we get to the just most exhilarating part of this topic, which is conditional statements. Now, what are conditional statements? Well, think of the words. Conditional means something is going to happen depending on some sort of prerequisite, I guess. I don't know. You say a lot of people say, all right, I will mow the lawn under one condition, and you have to give me $20. So if I give this person $20, then they'll mow the lawn for me. And this is something that is almost the exact same sort of logic we can use in programming. So let's see what this looks like. I'm going to say we have some x is equal to 5. I'm going to say if x is greater than 0. If x is greater than 0. Now, this is what's called the header of the conditional statement. Just like the header of your function, end it with a colon. And we will see that, look, it indented us forward, and everything in the code that's that same indentation will be a part of this if statement. So if x is greater than 0, then I'm going to say x is a positive number. Now, if I run the program, it prints out that 5 is a positive number. Well, what if it wasn't? What if it was -2? I run it now, and it doesn't give me any value whatsoever. This is because we did not meet the condition of this if statement. X failed to meet the criteria that it had to be greater than 0. And because it failed that, it ignored this print statement. But, however, if I were to exit the if statement and print out some stuff, like this is on the outside of the print statement, see how it's not indented like it is over here? That means this print statement is not a part of the if statement. So even if the if statement doesn't run, it still prints out that line on line 6. If I were to move this such that it was indented, even though I'm saying it's on the outside of print statement, it isn't now. I should say if statement. Now when I run it, nothing happens again. That's because I have made this print statement a part of the if statement by indenting it. So let's move that back over. There. Now, of course, we run it, we'll get that value. And if we make the if statement work again, we'll get both sentences. 2 is a positive number, and this is on the outside of the if statement. So now it runs both the prints. Okay. Well, that's all interesting. What else can we do? Well, we have something called the else statement. The else statement has no specified condition like we have over here. It's just else and then the colon. It's its own header. The condition in the else statement is implied because it's always going to be the exact opposite condition of the if statement. Namely that x is 0 or less than 0. So if you had to think of it, the implied condition is basically not x is greater than 0. But you don't write that because the else takes care of it for you. If this doesn't work, all else is going to run under this condition. So I'm going to print out that x is either 0 or a negative number. And if I run it, it says, all right, 2 is a positive number. And this is on the outside if statement. So it ignored everything in here. Because the program met the if condition and thus skipped this condition. Because this only works if the if statement doesn't work. For example, -2. I run it now. -2 is either 0 or a negative number. Now it runs the else statement because it failed to meet the if statement. Let's say I want to get more specific though. I don't want to know. I don't have to guess if it's 0 or a negative number. I want to know for sure. So then what we can do is use what's called the else if statement, or elif. This has to have a condition. So I'm going to make that condition at x is less than 0. And of course, if x is less than 0, then that means x is a negative number. Then I'm going to get rid of this. Because the only other situation, if x isn't positive or negative, it has to be 0. So now let's run it. It says -2 is a negative number, and of course prints that outside statement here. So what happened was it checks if the if statement, the original one, is true, and it's not. So the computer then checks, all right, is this statement true? It sees that it is. So it prints out this value, ignores the else statement, and then it goes right back to whatever's on the outside of that sequence of statements. So, all right, what if x was 0? Well, then of course z is 0. Z is 0, or x is 0. I don't know why I was saying z. X is 0. 0 is 0. Because our x is 0, it checks this first condition, sees that it's false. 0 is not greater than 0. Checks the elif condition. 0 is not less than 0. So the only other outcome is that it is 0. So it prints the else statement. It ignores the first two conditional statements, and only uses the third one. And of course, if I made it greater than, it would only play the if statement. It sees that, yes, indeed, now x is greater than 0, prints out this, ignores the other two conditions, doesn't even bother to check them. How do I know it's not going to bother to check them? Let me put another condition in there. Else if x is greater than 2. I'm going to print out x is greater than 2. So now let's look at this. 6 is greater than 0 and 6 is greater than 2. So theoretically it meets both of these conditions here. But when I run it, it only prints out the if statement. Because the way the code works is it's checking the first one. It sees that the first one works. So it prints out this. Ignores everything else in the sequence of conditionals. And because of that, skips this condition despite the fact that it meets that condition. 6 is greater than 2. But because it met the first if statement, it's going to skip all the rest of the stuff. Now, if you wanted to have it check both of them and work for both of them, what you would have to do basically is just make this an if statement. And then what it does is it breaks the chain, because the if statement is always the beginning of a chain of if, else, and else if statements. And like if I made them all if statements, it would check each thing individually. well, I would have to make this like, all right, x is equal to 0. This time it would check them all individually because each if statement is treated as its own thing now. So now when I run it, it prints out both of these because it's no longer a part of that chain of if, and else statements. If we use the else and else if statements, it treats it all as kind of one chain of code. Whereas if we just say that they're if this, it's going to check every one of them and not skip over anything. Both can be useful, we'll see more specific examples in the next video, but both styles have their uses.